Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise today to speak to C-23, the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act. And I have followed this debate with great interest, Madam Speaker, and listened to the arguments being made for and against. And my own personal experience with Colombia and with Colombians, I guess on some level I can appreciate what is being said by those with one point of view, and on the other level I'm inclined to want to fill them in on at least my understanding of what has gone on in Colombia over the years and just my experience having spent time in Colombia. And it is about people. There's no doubt about it that this debate is about people. And it's about ensuring that people have a right to live the kind of lives that we live and that we are comfortable living and have the same rights and freedoms that we enjoy. And that has been a problem in years past. That was a problem when I spent time in Colombia working with street children. There were times when young boys, in fact, would be taken and destroyed, absolutely destroyed. Young street boys destroyed by paramilitary and by police because they were considered a nuisance. But we were there. I was working with a not-for-profit group, and we were there to show that it didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be that way then, and it doesn't have to be that way now. And I know from what I have read, from people I've spoken with, that progress has been made in Colombia. And we will continue to make progress if we lead by example. And that's what my remarks are going to be about today. It's the obligation that countries like Canada have to make the point that we can lead by example, that look at what we're doing, let's enter into business arrangements, let's enter into whatever arrangements we have to enter into so that people will understand that this is not the right way to do it, that we do not take people for granted, that we do not treat people with disrespect, that we do not hold people up and say, you're no good because you can't do this or you can't do that, or because you cannot make a contribution. What we have to do as Canadians and what we have to do as a country is show them that that is not the way to go. And when I listen to colleagues talk about trade unionists being murdered, that's serious. That is serious. And I do know, based on information that I have read, just as the colleague that just spoke referenced information that she read suggesting that a great more trade unionists are being murdered, that's not the same information that we have. We would not stand here supporting anything that would be detrimental to the people of Colombia. I stand here today because I believe we can make a difference. We can show people that the way to live is to work together, to share our values with people who want to make a change in the world and understand that we can work together to make that difference. When we talk about the people of Colombia, they need to feel confident. They need to know that there are people out there who care, that there are people who want to help them make a difference. And how do we do that? Again, we lead by example. And if that means entering into business with Colombia business people, then we do that. Because we can, through building relationships, through working together, lead by example. And by building these relationships, you build trust. And when you build trust, people come to understand that they can, in fact, depend on you. I think it's really important to go down this path. I think it's important for a group of people that I spent a considerable amount of time with. And I referenced street children earlier. Street children are children who were members of a family, particularly in rural parts of Colombia. And because the father had to leave home through no choice of their own, left a family behind, in some cases 10 children for a mother to raise. The father didn't leave because he wanted to leave. He left because there were no opportunities for him for employment, no legitimate opportunities. So this is where the drug lords enter the picture. This is where you have drug lords providing employment. And guess what? The fathers never ever returned to the home because they knew that in doing so, they'd probably be putting their families at risk. So they continue to work in an environment that was less than safe for them and one that they felt was probably even worse for their families should they return home, because their families could be held to ransom. So we have families living without a father. We had mothers trying to raise as many as 10 children. What happened? The mother couldn't do it. It just was impossible to do. So the young boys in the family, many of whom weren't even teenagers, left home to form street gangs. And they became a member of a family. That family was the street gang. And as a member of that street gang, they did whatever they had to do to survive. But in doing so, that was when the paramilitaries and the police and whoever else was in authority considered them to be a nuisance, and more often than not, got rid of them. We need to be there. We need to do whatever we can to help those children. And when I talk about not-for-profit organizations, they are doing tremendous work in these countries. But we cannot leave it up to the not-for-profit organizations. It is not fair to do that. They only have limited resources, and there's no way that they can possibly do everything that needs to be done. All of this, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, to make the point that entering into economic arrangements is not only good for Canadians, but it's good for Colombians. I know as a Canadian, I want to do whatever's good in an economic free trade agreement that's going to be good for the people that I represent, for people in our country. And we do that by seeking out opportunities around the world. And this is one such opportunity. And I know it works. As a previous Minister of Industry, I led trade missions to different countries. In fact, I could list many companies that have entered into successful business arrangements with companies around the world. One example is Rudder Technologies Products in St. John's, Newfoundland, which is doing business in Asia, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, in Australia, New Zealand, South America, and North America. And by doing that, they are providing employment opportunities not only for people in Newfoundland and Labrador, but for people in other countries. And the same will happen in Colombia. There will be those opportunities that will come that will be legitimate opportunities for the men and women of Colombia. We have a part to play. We can help to make a difference in this country. And I think we need to do that. I think we have an obligation to do that. In fact, what we've seen happening in Colombia in the last while is a good news story. In fact, last year, we saw a two-way trade between Canada and Colombia merchandise trade that amounted to approximately $1.3 billion. Canada exports $703 million to Colombia in motor vehicles, manufactured goods, wheat and paper, and imports $644 million worth of goods from Colombia in coffee, bananas, coal, oil, sugar, and flowers. So it's a two-way opportunity, and there are benefits for both. And that is what we need to recognize. And by doing that, by entering into these kinds of arrangements, we do provide those legitimate working opportunities for Colombians. What's just as important to me as the free trade agreement itself is the side agreement on labor cooperation. And there's also one on environment. This side agreement with an economic arrangement cannot be overlooked. As with Canada's free trade agreements with Chile, Costa Rica, and NAFTA, the Canada-Colombia free trade agreement includes side agreements on labor cooperation and the environment. The Canada-Colombia Labor Cooperation Agreement recognizes both countries' obligations under the 1998 International Labour Organization Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, which requires each country ensure that their domestic laws, regulations, and practices protect the following rights. And Madam, just if I could, the right to freedom of association, the right to collective bargaining, the abolition of child labor, the elimination of forced or compulsory labor, and the elimination of discrimination. This is an incredible, important part of this particular free trade agreement.